Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to see everyone. Welcome back to Tim and Kathy. You know, it's kind of like having mom and dad back, right? So I was, right? And I know that every time mom and dad came back when I was a kid, I always got a gift. So I'm kind of waiting for my gift. So let's get started. So to start, I want to tell you that I did a better job with my label making this week. You know, now that I'm aware of it, I'm really shocked. And sadly, I'm really disappointed in myself on how negative those labels are that I make for others. For those of you who weren't here, we talked about Rahab, the prostitute, and the label that we have all given her. And I challenged everyone to smash their label makers. And I did good until yesterday. And I went up to my grandchildren, my twins. They were 8 yesterday. And I went up to their birthday party. And the oldest grandson had a girlfriend there. And my label maker was working overtime. And I had to stop and say, no, do not do that. See, the danger of labels is instead of seeing the able, we see the label. And as Adam Jones says, it's almost easier, I shouldn't say it's always, it is always easier to label than it is to understand. I'm going to read and paraphrase Joshua 2 throughout my sermon, but I want to remind you what I said about Rahab last week. Rahab was a businesswoman. She was successful. I might be inferring a little bit in that. She was obedient. She was brave. She was strong. She was fearless. She cared and protected her family. She was a woman of faith. So I'm going to start reading in Joshua 2. Then Joshua sent out 2 spies and instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there for the evening. So my first thought is, and I don't know if it's anybody else's thought, and I'm sorry if it's not, why did the spies choose to stay there? Well, the first answer that we probably all come to is pretty obvious, I guess. But really, when you go through the scripture, there are no improprieties or inappropriate even talk. So I'm not sure that that's the reason at all. In fact, I'm quite sure it's not. So my second thought is this. The rooms were neat and clean, right? The breakfast buffet was good, right? The pillows were soft. Probably for some of the same reasons that I stay at a casino and not a gambler. This makes me believe that she probably was a decent businesswoman, right? They're not going to stay at a place that's dirty and full of rodents, right? They're not going to stay at a place where there wasn't a nice meal to be had. So I might be inferring a little bit, but I'm assuming that her place of establishment was neat and clean and serve nourishing food. Now, I will tell you that some Bible scholars say that it was just her home, but most of them, I don't know if I should say Bible scholars, I got it online, so sometimes, but most people believe that it was an inn or a motel. Now, this will probably shock you, but aren't we all prostitutes of some kind? Obviously, we're not selling our bodies. But don't we sometimes sell our values out so we belong to a particular group? Don't we sometimes sell our souls for a relationship? Don't we sometimes sell our morals for a paycheck? You know, Judas sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. I once sold Jesus, or tried to, or came close to, for $4.17. And I think I've shared this story before, but it's worth telling again. I was a single mother of 4 children, and I had just bought the Cut River Inn. It's a restaurant about 20 miles down the road. And people, for those of you who believe that business people, are loaded, let me tell you, they're not. You typically put everything you have into that, hoping for a return on your investment someday. And the way I made my money was I waited tables at the restaurant. And for any of you that know springtime around here, you can blow a cannon anywhere on US 2 between the hours of 9 p.m. and 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. the next morning, and no one would ever get hit, right? There is nobody here in the springtime. And somebody had called in a to-go order. And the cook took the order, and the cook cooked the order, and the cook brought it out to the people and talked with them. And I took their money and sent them on their way. And when they left $4.17 on the counter. That $4.17 should have been the cook's, right? But I wanted it. I wanted it bad. At that time, my budget for food for me and my 4 children was $35 a week, right? And that would have been a ninth of that budget. And I had everything I could do not to take that $4.17. Now, if I would have, that cook knew I was a child of God. She knew I proclaimed that I was a Jesus follower. And if I had taken that money and put it in my pocket, what would she have thought of Jesus' reputation if I was willing to sell him for $4.17? See, I think that we all saw parts of ourselves much more than we like to believe. I'm going to continue reading in Joshua. If you remember, the spies are at Rahab's house. But someone told the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy on our land. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, yep, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk, as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch them. Before Rahab had ever had any conversation with God, she chose the approval of God over the applause of men. Think about that. She pleased God instead of man. Now, I don't know about you, but I am a people pleaser from way back when. I like it when people are pleased with me. I like it a lot. It feels so good. And honestly, sometimes it feels better than when God is pleased with you. Because when God is pleased with you, it usually meant you had to be obedient to something, or you had to give something up, or you had to sacrifice something. All the things that don't feel good to the flesh, right? And the thing of it is that people-pleasing, it's immediate. People love you. But pleasing God, sometimes you got to wait to heaven to get your reward, right? I always think of that story about the missionary and the rock star, right? On the boat, coming home, both had been gone for months, and the rock star gets off the boat, and thousands of people are around, and they're hollering his name, and the press is there, and everybody wants a piece of this guy. And then the missionary gets off the boat, and there's nobody. There's nobody. No fanfare, nothing. And he started fighting in his spirit with God. Like, what the heck? I'm just giving you everything I had for a year. And this is what God said to him. You're not home yet. Right? But sometimes that's hard for us to remember. And Rahab, I think of Rahab. I'm sure she felt all these things. If she would have turned over those men to this king, her earthly life would have been different forever. Think about it. She'd have been in the king's great graces. She'd probably lived in the palace. And instead, she chose to please God and not man. I'm going to continue reading from Joshua. Before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk with them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she said. We are all afraid. Everyone in this land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to the 2 kings east of the Jordan, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. You know, Rahab shared that no one had the courage to fight. But Rahab had courage. She was fearless. I love the saying that says, courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. And stupidity is the same. And that's why life is hard. Isn't that the truth? Right? Isn't that the truth? I mean, I think about Zeke with his business, right? And as a businessman, he had to step out sometimes. And we've had these conversations. We might not have used the exact word is it courage or is it stupid? But pretty much, are we doing the right thing? Or are we just being ridiculous, right? And because there's a fine balancing line there. But I have to tell you, I'm going to say it on record, Mr. DeWyse. Mr. DeWyse was right many more times than I was. Anyway, we'll go on. But Rahab must have been having some of those very same thoughts, right? Man, oh man, I'm giving up everything I know for something I don't know much about, right? And what about her family? Her family must have thought she was crazy. What are you doing, Rahab? But she had courage, and she was fearless. Rahab was willing to give up everything she knew for a lifestyle she knew nothing about. And that takes courage. I will tell you that a lack of courage is a character flaw of mine. I'm not a very courageous person. Every day, every single day before I go to school and before I walk into my classroom, I'm anxious. Am I going to give them what they need? Have I prepared well enough? Am I going to change their lives? I have anxiety every single day. Every time before I stand here, I'm nervous. I'm anxious. I'm fearful. You know, when Drake was a toddler, we had a pool in the backyard. And I was cleaning the pool. Zeke was doing some yard work. And Drake fell in the pool. Now, as a mother, you would have thought I would have dove in after him. And you know what I did? I screamed. And I continued to scream until Zeke got there and jumped in and saved our little 2-year-old. Not very proud of that at all. But it just shows you how courageous she must have been. You know, I like predictability. I like comfort. I like things that are familiar. Heck, I get nervous if I take the different way to the zoo, right? And Rahab was willing to give up everything for something she didn't know anything about. You know, I think of what Tim said, that they had a wonderful time, but in the last week, they were ready to come home. right? Because all of us probably can relate to that. We like that comfort. We like that routine. We like that familiarity. And yet Rahab was willing to risk her whole life, her whole culture, for her belief in the God of Israel. And it was a baby faith. We have to remember, it was a baby faith because she said they were fearful. And Proverbs says, right? What is the beginning? Oh, fear of the Lord, is the beginning of faith. So it was just a beginning faith. It was just a baby. She was just a baby. And look at the remarkableness of some of her actions. Joshua 2, verse 12. Now swear to me, this is Rahab talking. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family, since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live, along with my father, along with my mothers, my brothers, my sisters, and all of their families. Rahab was a protector. She wanted to make sure that her family was safe, secure, protected. But she was also, I think, wise enough to know that going into a new culture and a new lifestyle, that it would be so much easier to do that with her family, her connections, her home, and her relationships. And Tim, my phone is behind you. Would you bring that to me, please? You know, in my class at school, we've just finished we've just finished a unit on substance abuse. And on the last day of that unit, we created an alcohol gallery. Now, an alcohol gallery is kind of similar to an art gallery. What I did is I printed out pieces of paper that had a frame around it, and then just nothing in the inside. And I asked students to write down or draw a picture of how alcohol or drugs had negatively impacted their lives. There's 24 students in the two classes. And some of them were like, Mrs. DeWyse, I don't have anything. And it was like, thank God for that, right? Right? Thank God for that. But out of the 24 students, 17 had something on their picture frame. And someday I'm going to put them on the board because it's much more impressive when you see it in their handwriting. But I'm going to read you a couple of them. My father wasn't very present in my childhood. I didn't get the love and support I needed at the time. Ruined my parents' marriage and my relationship with my dad. Because of drugs, my dad has been in jail multiple times. Alcohol has caused many problems in my family as well. Alcohol has caused a lot of problems in my family. It has gotten so bad the cops have been involved many, many times. Caused life-changing memories. Because of drugs and alcohol, I haven't seen my dad in 7 years. My father would get drunk and would become mentally and physically abusive. After the students had done it, then we hung them up like an art gallery. And everybody got to look and read. And I actually invited other teachers up because we have to know where our students are coming from. They've lost that connection, right? That Rahab was trying to maintain. And that's a whole other sermon, but how can we expect those students to learn Spanish when they're dealing with things like that at home? But that's for another day. But during this segment, we learned about an experiment that they did back in the 60s with a rat. They put this rat in a cage, and they gave them 2 water bottles. And in one of the water bottles was just water. And in the other water bottle was water laced with heroin and cocaine. Okay? And of course, like we can all guess, the rat chose the heroin and cocaine laced water and killed himself by overdosing. The interesting thing is in the 1970s, and I don't remember his name, but a psychologist decided that there were some flaws with that because they had determined at that time that alcohol and drugs were like a hook that got into you, right? And you couldn't get away from that. But he thought there might be some flaws in that kind of thinking. So he created something called Rat Park. Does anybody ever have that? Anybody's ever heard of this? This is quite interesting, actually. And Rat Park was where they put many, many rats together in a perfect scenario for rats. All the food they wanted, right? All the balls and the little toys they wanted, and all the rats to enjoy each other. And they gave them the water, and the water laced with heroin and cocaine. And the interesting thing that they found, guess what? As long as those rats had those connections, they chose the water without the drugs. They chose the water without the drugs. They said that really we even almost have a human experiment, quite inadvertently, but Vietnam. And I'm hopefully I'm not saying this way out of, but the amount of our armed forces that took heroin and engaged in heroin during their time in Vietnam was like 20 to 30% of all of them. And the government was so concerned because they knew that these troops were going to come home and there was going to be all of this, we need to get them off of this drug. And what they found is that 95% of them who came home to their connections, to their relationships, to their comfort, to their home, never did heroin again. Now, I'm not saying that that's all the problem with alcohol or drugs, but I will tell you that it definitely is a piece. We crave those connections, those relationships, those homes. I'm going to finish up with the end of Joshua, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it's quite long. What is that? Oh, that is so funny. I was like, that's not my cell phone song. Okay, we offer our lives as a guarantee for your safety. These are the two spies talking back to Rahab. The men agreed, if you don't betray us, we will keep our promise, and we will be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land. But they gave her some instructions. She must leave a scarlet cord hanging from the window. And all the family members and all the relatives, they can't be out in the marketplace, they can't be working, they need to be in the home, or they would not be protected. And Rahab did what she was told. A couple things stand out to me at the end of this. Number one, she was obedient. And it was immediate. And it was without question. And let's remember, she had a baby faith at that time. So I've been doing this gig for about 35 years, and I'm going to tell you that my obedience doesn't come that fast, and it doesn't come that immediate, right? I thought several years ago, God was really dealing with me to, this is going to sound crazy, but to wash and clean my husband's truck. I didn't want to. I didn't want to. In fact, the first thing when God kind of spoke that to me was like, he hasn't done anything for me lately. The second thing was, I would rather take a good beating than clean a vehicle. I hate cleaning vehicles, right? Isn't that interesting how God just works us? And the last thing it was, I just don't want to. just don't want to. It took days. I hate to say weeks. I don't think it was quite weeks. It took days for me to get to do what God wanted me to do. And it was a vehicle, for heaven's sakes. It wasn't a lifestyle change like Rahab. Rahab did act in obedience immediately. The other thing I think you can notice is the scarlet cord. And I'm not a Bible scholar. I wish I was, but I knew there was some symbolism there. I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up. Sorry for those of you who knew exactly what it was, but obviously it's the blood of Jesus, right? Just like the Passover with the blood of the lamb. And that cord would protect that family. You know, in the last couple weeks, I've really worked hard to redeem Rahab's reputation. I don't know why it's so important for me, but it's just so important for me that you understand that Rahab was really a pretty cool woman. And she had all these great things going for her. And yeah, she had some sin going on. But so do you and I. Right? I think the reason that we've not looked at Rahab in this way for so many years is because before we got to know her, we labeled her. We labeled her Rahab the prostitute. And when we label, we don't look what they're able to do. We just go with the label. So church, let's throw away our label makers. It creates disconnection, not connection. It creates us and them. And it does nothing for the kingdom of God.